A wealthy merchant loses everything at sea, washes ashore in a foreign city, and within a generation, that accident reshapes how millions of people think about suffering, choice, and the good life. That is not a parable someone invented. It is, as far as the ancient sources allow us to know, roughly what happened to Zeno of Citium. Here is the question worth sitting with. What does it take for a catastrophic loss to become a foundation, rather than just an ending? Zeno was born around 334 BC in Citium, a city on the island of Cyprus, whose inhabitants carried both Greek and Phoenician heritage. The ancient sources, chiefly Diogenes Laertius, writing in the 3rd century AD, describe him as a merchant who became genuinely prosperous. He traveled trade routes across the Mediterranean. He had wealth, a profession, and presumably a clear picture of what his future looked like. That picture included ships, cargo, and the kind of financial security that came from knowing the sea routes well. Then, on a voyage from Phoenicia to the port of Piraeus, his ship went down. He survived. That detail matters more than it might first appear. He reached Athens, the intellectual center of the ancient world, carrying nothing of his former commercial life. What Diogenes records next is striking in its ordinariness. Zeno walked into a bookseller's shop. There he encountered Xenophon's Memorabilia, a portrait of Socrates in conversation. He read it and was moved enough to ask the bookseller where men like Socrates could still be found. It is the question of someone whose priorities had just been rearranged by circumstance. Not the question of a man still calculating cargo values and return margins. Something had shifted in what he thought was worth pursuing. At that precise moment, Crates of Thebes, the most prominent cynic philosopher then living in Athens, happened to be passing outside. The bookseller pointed to him. Zeno followed. That chain of contingencies, Shipwreck, Bookshop, a philosopher walking by, planted the seed of an entire school of thought. Within roughly a generation, Zeno was teaching in the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch in Athens, and the people who gathered around him came to be called Stoics. The name of the whole tradition came from an architectural feature, a covered walkway where a shipwrecked merchant had decided to think out loud with anyone willing to listen. But here is what the story is really teaching, even before Zeno articulated it as philosophy. The shipwreck stripped away everything external: cargo, wealth, the social position a successful merchant carried. What it could not touch was Zeno's capacity to choose what to do next. He still had his attention, his curiosity, his willingness to ask a question of a bookseller. The loss was real and substantial. The response was entirely his. That distinction between what happens to us and what we do with our response became the structural spine of Stoic philosophy. The school Zeno built emphasized virtue as the only genuine good, and virtue, crucially, is something no storm, no financial ruin, no hostile government can take from you. External events sit outside your control. Your judgment of them and what you choose to do next does not. Diogenes Laertius records that even before the shipwreck, Zeno had consulted an oracle asking how to attain the best life. The oracle's answer, as reported, was that he should take on the complexion of the dead, meaning, the sources suggest, that he should immerse himself in the wisdom of ancient authors. He began doing exactly that in parallel with his merchant career. Philosophy was already pulling at him. The shipwreck did not invent his curiosity. It removed the obstacle that might have kept commerce permanently dominant over reflection. That nuance matters, and it is worth being honest about why the story resonates so widely, while also being careful not to oversell it. The Stoic tradition does not claim that catastrophe is secretly good, or that suffering produces wisdom automatically. Plenty of people survive ruin and simply suffer. What the Zeno account illustrates is something narrower and more useful. When external structure collapses, the question of what you actually value becomes unavoidable. The pressure clarifies. It does not guarantee anything, but it does force the question into the open in a way that comfort rarely manages. Most of us are not facing shipwrecks, but the pressure of clarification arrives in smaller forms constantly. A job ends, a relationship changes, a plan fails. The mind immediately scrambles to restore what was lost. That scramble is understandable. It is also, in the Stoic framing, often a mistake, because it directs energy toward recovering the uncontrollable rather than exercising the one thing that was never taken away in the first place. So what does this look like as a practice today? In the morning, before the day loads its demands on you, spend 60 seconds asking a single question. What is genuinely within my control today? And what am I treating as if it were, but isn't? Write the answer down if that helps. The point is not to become indifferent to outcomes. Zeno did not stop caring what happened. He founded a school and spent decades building it into something lasting. The point is to locate where your actual agency lives before the day's noise obscures it entirely. In the middle of a difficult moment, a conversation going sideways, a plan unraveling, a result arriving that you did not want, the Stoic move is not to suppress the feeling. It is to pause long enough to separate the event from your interpretation of it. Something has gone wrong. That is the fact. The story you are building around it, the catastrophizing or the denial, is a second thing, and it is yours to examine. Even 5 seconds of that pause changes what comes next. It is a small discipline, but practiced consistently, it begins to feel less like effort and more like clarity. In the evening, the practice Zeno's tradition refined was a brief review. Where did I exercise good judgment today, and where did I hand it over to something I couldn't control anyway? Not as self-punishment. As calibration, you are training the same faculty Zeno apparently walked into that Athenian bookshop with. The ability to orient toward what is real and workable rather than toward what is merely wished for. What changes with consistent practice is not that life becomes easier or that losses stop hurting. It is that your relationship to uncertainty shifts. You stop organizing your sense of security around circumstances that can change without warning. Because you have practiced, repeatedly, noticing that the circumstance is not actually where your stability lives. That is a slow change. It is also a durable one, which is precisely why a philosophy founded in a shipwreck is still being discussed 2,300 years later. Zoom out for a moment. The Stoic framework Zeno began building connects to something most philosophical traditions have noticed: that human suffering is disproportionately driven not by events themselves, but by the gap between what we expect and what arrives. We are not built to simply accept every outcome without resistance, but we can train the part of the mind that assigns meaning to outcomes, the part that decides what an event says about us and whether our life is still workable from here. That training does not require a dramatic reversal. It requires repetition. Small, honest, daily repetition. Zeno arrived in Athens in the ancient sources account as someone who had lost what he thought he was. He left that city decades later as someone who had built something that outlasted every ship that ever sailed from Phoenicia. Not because the shipwreck was secretly fortunate, because he paid attention to what the shipwreck could not take. His curiosity remained, his willingness to ask questions remained, his capacity for judgment remained. Those were the things he invested, and they compounded over decades into a school of thought that shaped Roman emperors, modern psychotherapy, and countless ordinary lives. According to Diogenes Laertius, Zeno was honored with a public funeral by the Athenians when he died, a mark of genuine civic respect for a man who had arrived as a foreign merchant with nothing. That trajectory, from shipwreck to public honor, was not built on recovering what the sea took. It was built on the consistent exercise of what the sea left behind. The question that stays with that story is not about Zeno. It is about the next time something you counted on disappears. What will you notice in the wreckage that was always yours? Stoicism. Master your judgments. Practice what is yours to control.